Well, I've finally gotten round to doing it. Here is every theatrical animated DreamWorks movie ranked. There are many more DreamWorks movies than Pixar movies, and I kept on pausing this marathon of movies for months. But I've now seen all of them, and it's an interesting selection overall. Some of them are on par with the best Pixar movies, and others are just complete shite. But let's rank the theatrical animated DreamWorks movies.
Oh, fuck! This is a fucking disaster!
I have very little to say about Spirit Untamed. I didn't really like the first one, but this one was worse, especially the animation, which looks unfinished. There is also very little connection to the original movie aside from Spirits, and the film ends exactly the same way as the original did. Initially I ranked this above Shrek the Third, but I was honestly being too nice. At least that film, along with all the others I initially ranked beneath it, have distinct layers of awfulness, and in most cases I felt something watching them, but that just wasn't the case with this movie. There's the odd funny joke, and the climax is mildly intriguing, but otherwise, this is a boring movie that I have very little to say about.
Are you kidding me? Are you out of your mind?
One of the main problems with Shark Tale is that there is actually no reason for this film to take place underwater. If the characters were humans and the film took place in New York, nothing about the story would change. And just like Chicken Little, it derails a lot of plot points and jokes.
Who in the hell of it trips underwater?
Newsflash, pointing out plot holes in your film doesn't mean they're not plot holes anymore. But even if you accept this completely superfluous setting, it's not even that imaginative. It's just crawling with product placement, half-baked world building, and a load of horrible puns.
I'm Katie Current.
Muscle grow! Jessica Schrimpson! Todd Stewart!
Ha! It's funny because they're fish. Do you get the puns? Do you get the puns?
Yes!
The film is also very ugly and boring. I cannot believe anyone would approve the designs of Oscar or Lola. Ugh. Anything that's not ugly in Shark Tale is ridiculously boring to look at. It actually reminds me of the hideous art style of Video Brinquedo movies. How come Finding Nemo came out in 2003 and the animation has aged like fine wine, and Shark Tale came out in 2004 and the animation looked hideous even for the time? I also dislike the characters. I think Oscar is too stupid and selfish. The first time we see him, he's monologuing about how great he is and how glad we should be to see him. Stop trying to be hip with the cool kids, Oscar, you're embarrassing yourself. At least he doesn't floss. And although he does see he was wrong, he doesn't exactly do a whole lot to redeem himself. Unlike, say, Lightning McQueen. What's also mind-boggling is how everyone believes Oscar's lie that he killed Frankie, and he instantly becomes famous, even though there was no proof of it, as well as the fact that it would probably be impossible for a fish like him to kill a much larger great white shark. And it's clear that these actors were just picked for no other reason than to sell tickets. While Robert De Niro and Martin Scorsese are well cast, though I am legitimately shocked they got Scorsese to say Puff Daddy, the rest just feel out of place, with Will Smith and Renee Zellweger not bringing much to their roles, and Jack Black putting on an incredibly annoying voice. There's a lot of problems with this movie, but a big one is that it doesn't seem suited for kids or adults. It's obviously aimed towards kids because of the pointless underwater setting and juvenile humour, yet it also features themes such as gambling, loan sharks, and the mafia, which are not exactly themes that kids will understand, as well as a ton of random references to movies that most kids won't have seen, with no subtlety. The reason the cultural references work in the first two Shrek movies is because they're funny if you get the reference, but if not, they still work in the context of the story, which just isn't the case with Shark Tale. Is anything good? Well, this line is delivered brilliantly.
Are you kidding me? Are you out of your mind?
Although most of the soundtrack consists of random pop songs, the limited amount of music composed by Hans Zimmer is actually pretty good. Just wish they used more of him, and I honestly wish this movie had used more rewrites.
Boy, you are slow.
Turbo is such a bad movie. While DreamWorks is known for taking ideas that sound stupid and going far and beyond with them, this is a stupid premise and a stupid execution. Howdy hey, this movie is not funny. I think I laughed once the entire movie. The rest is just painfully unfunny. Like Shark Tale, the film is chock-a-block with offensive stereotypes, the Mexican taco lover in particular. What's more, this film has a twist villain, and it's basically the racer that Turbo idolised for years. But once he reveals that he's the villain to Turbo, he immediately starts acting like a jerk in front of everyone, which he never did before. And what's more, having him as a villain adds nothing to the story, because he'd still be in competition with Turbo either way. The big race comes, and towards the end, all the cars have crashed, and Turbo is the only one still in the race. But he's lost his super speed. So what does he do? He gives up, despite being very close to the finish line and having no competition. Instead, he needs a pep talk from his brother to finish the race. Wow, how inspiring! Turbo is just shite, but it's better than Shark Tale, because while it is probably more stupid, it does have much better animation.
The baby's sleeping.
To think that the Lego Batman movie got snubbed for Best Animated Feature in favour of this. The first third of The Boss Baby was one of the most anxiety-inducing film experiences I've ever had. From the frequent uncomfortable imagery to the annoying characters, it was just utterly intolerable. Had the movie continued like this, it would be the worst animated DreamWorks movie, and possibly even worse than The Cat in the Hat. But, to be fair, the next two-thirds, while also terrible, weren't quite as bad. The film does maintain some creativity in the imagination sequences, and while I dislike both Boss Baby and Tim as characters, that part where the former tells the latter about how he never had a childhood and had to grow up straight away is somewhat poignant. But that's pretty much it for positives. The film does make other attempts at emotional depth, but they are just awful. The worst one being when Tim and Boss Baby argue and split up, and Tim sits in the airport moping and doping, and we're supposed to feel sad, even though it's pretty much another case of us knowing they're going to realise they were idiots and make up. Not to mention, it adds nothing to the story. Much like with Turbo, the premise and its execution are bizarre and stupid, and also maintains a confusing tone, terrible jokes, and random cultural references. The Boss Baby is a step up from Turbo, because at least it has some creativity, though not a lot, and the one somewhat poignant scene I mentioned earlier, but that in no way qualifies as a recommendation.
Hello, bro. Don't burn all my frankincense and myrrh.
This movie blows. To those who think the Shrek franchise is terrible, you have all been corrupted by this movie. The story is needlessly overstuffed, and while the two main storylines work off each other, the other storylines have no purpose. The movie has a similar problem to Frozen 2, trying to give all the established characters something new to do, and consequently producing a variety of superfluous side plots. Fiona being pregnant, Puss and Donkey switching bodies, Fiona teaming up with the princesses. All these storylines could be removed from the film, with absolutely nothing changing.
Nothing!
And so could these characters. But it's also worse than Frozen 2 in this regard, because they feel obliged to shoehorn in new characters with no impact on the story. Arthur is the only new character with any story purpose, and his and Shrek's conversation at the campfire is the one emotionally gripping scene in the whole movie. It's legitimately shocking that half the screenwriters of this film also wrote the amazing Who Framed Roger Rabbit. The difference in quality is enormous. When you look at the amazing song choices in Shrek and Shrek 2, Shrek the Third's song choices stick out like a sore thumb. Aside from Royal Pain, which fits perfectly, the songs don't fit the scenes at all. Live and Let Die plays at King Harold's funeral. This is a Bond song, by the way. After Arthur leaves and Shrek is chained up, the song Nine Crimes is playing, which is a song about infidelity. And then there's this. Not only do they butcher the timing of the scream, but then they play a completely different song. Something else they butcher is Prince Charming, who, while a good secondary villain in Shrek 2, fails miserably as the primary villain of this movie. But even the secondary and tertiary villains of this movie are terrible. They literally change alliances anytime someone gives a 2-minute speech. Like, what the fuck? And holy hell is this movie not funny. While most of the toilet humour in the first two Shrek films had context, primarily in establishing the disgusting nature of ogres, Shrek the Third just references poo and vomit every 5 minutes for cheap laughs. There's a ton of other weak jokes as well. The only jokes I remember laughing at were Pinocchio trying not to lie, and Puss trying to act cute in Donkey's body, even if the plotline it came from was completely irrelevant. Otherwise, no, I did not laugh at this movie. So yeah, Shrek the Third has a terrible script, unnecessary side plots and characters, a terrible choice of music, horrible jokes, and is honestly a massive fart on the legacy of Shrek. And, frankly, this fart would have been better in than out.
Ow! Ow! Titty twister! Ow! Hurts!
The Boss Baby family business was actually okay. For the first 10 minutes. I thought the idea that Tim was growing apart from his daughter and the theme of growing up wasn't too badly executed, and it still maintained some of the creative visuals that made the first Boss Baby a 2 out of 10 movie. I also like the scene where Tim, in the body of a child, helps his daughter's singing confidence. These aspects put the movie above the first Boss Baby. But the movie is still awful. As with the first movie, the tone is confusing and unbalanced. The premise is still utterly bizarre. The twist about the principal being a baby and his plan are just weird and not in a funny way. And speaking of which, the movie is not funny. There are all kinds of weird and unfunny jokes, but the worst one would be when Tim and Ted are pinching each other's chests while fighting around the house. Ugh. The Boss Baby Family Business is an improvement over its predecessor, but still a very bad movie overall, and one of those rare instances where DreamWorks clearly cared more about making money than continuing the story in a meaningful way.
Bazinga, punk, now we're even.
I did not like Home as a teenager, and rewatching it as an adult, it's probably even worse. While it does have enough good qualities to keep it above Shrek the Third or the Boss Baby duology, such as giving some good new songs and a few creative jokes and ideas, including when O modifies Tip's car to resemble a corner shop, it's mostly annoying and predictable. Many films have done the kid befriends an alien concept, including E.T. the Extraterrestrial and Lilo and Stitch, but Home feels like a much more childish and unimaginative version of the latter. Kind of like Shrek the Third, it has a single poignant scene when O and Tip are talking about her struggles to fit in and her desperation to return to her mother, but almost everything else is just crap. One of the biggest issues for me is the casting of Jim Parsons. While he was great as Sheldon Cooper on The Big Bang Theory, his voice really did not suit this character. Literally all I see is Sheldon as an alien. I probably would have cast Billy Crystal or Jack Black. I think their voices would have suited the character a lot more.
There is no secret ingredient. It's just you.
You and I are a team.
Don't feed me any more lines from Monsters, Inc. It pisses me off.
The film is painfully predictable, and uses the lie revealed bit, and it is so obvious that O is going to realise he was an idiot and reconcile with Tip. The animation is fine, but it's mostly the humans that are well animated. The alien designs really aren't that interesting. I don't really have much more to say. It's just boring, predictable, unfunny, and annoying.
I am inevitable.
Trolls World Tour was utterly bizarre, and also simultaneously boring. I was very bored for most of the movie. The last 10 minutes about how people being different makes them stand out is somewhat interesting, but otherwise, it is a very dull experience. The plot is basically Avengers Infinity War, but with music, and James Corden's bigger role was very unnecessary. And fuck this movie for having James Corden troll have a candy addiction, thus reminding me of that god-awful scene in the Emoji Movie. I have very little to say, and it's just about a step up from Home.
Meh.
This film is not so commonly remembered among other DreamWorks movies, and yeah, it's pretty boring for the most part. The animation looks great, the voice acting is good, but the story is bland and forgettable, and it brings the film down a lot here. Not awful, but not memorable either.
We said meh. M-E-H. Meh.
Trolls is another movie I don't have much to talk about, but it's not as boring as Sinbad. It's visually creative, and the song Can't Stop the Feeling is great, even if I don't understand why they auto-tuned Justin Timberlake's voice. But it's just void of interesting writing or characters. Also, why is James Corden in this?
My lovely horse running through the field.
As much as I loved Hans Zimmer's music in Spirit Stallion of the Cimarron, I wanted it to replace the pop songs, which I thought were an unnecessary addition, as well as Matt Damon's narration. It's mostly just kind of boring to me. Hans Zimmer's music is great, as is the animation, and the relationship between Spirit and Little Creek is okay, but otherwise, I don't have a whole lot to say. I genuinely think conveying Spirit's thoughts through his emotions and actions would have been a lot better than giving his exposition through Matt Damon, as much as I like him. It's not awful, but I don't plan to watch it again. B-Movie is clearly best remembered as a meme, but otherwise it would probably be forgotten, because it's not actually that good of a film. DreamWorks is known for taking ideas that sound stupid and going far and beyond with them, but B-Movie is just kind of boring in its execution of its bizarre premise. Most of the jokes aren't that funny. There's the odd funny joke, and John Goodman and Patrick Warburton are hilarious in their roles. I'm trying to preside over this cod case, but I'm dummy thick, and the clap of my ass cheeks keeps alerting the bees. But unlike in The Emperor's New Groove, they weren't paired up with that funny a script. Most of the jokes are just, haha, bees use honey for everything. And there's some other rather awkward jokes as well.
That girl was hot.
She's my cousin.
She is?
We're all cousins.
Right, you're right.
Do you live together?
Wait a minute, this
Are
isn't about...
you her little bedbug?
How about a suicide pact?
I'll sting you, you step on me.
That just kills you twice.
Yeah, the film ain't that funny. And I don't think Jerry Seinfeld's voice fits Barry at all. So yeah, some good animation, vocal performances and a couple of funny jokes. but mostly a rather mediocre film.
Why, I'm the captain.
Despite being set in the Shrek universe, Puss in Boots doesn't really feel like a Shrek movie. While the Shrek films subvert the fairy tale genre, Puss in Boots plays it dead straight. Does Puss in Boots hold up in spite of this? Well, it's not as funny or deep as the Shrek trilogy, but it certainly beats that awful fanfic that came out between Shrek 2 and Shrek Forever After. Though, come to think of it, the film just isn't that funny at all. But it has some poignancy, like when we learn the backstory of the relationship between Puss and Humpty, even if it does take up a lot of the runtime. And there is some decent action. I guess I don't have a whole lot more to say, but I guess it's a 6 out of 10, although it is closer to a 5 than a 7.
I'm a monster!
Monsters vs. Aliens is a film that I remember really enjoying as a kid. Rewatching it as an adult though, I find that even though there are some funny moments, particularly through Seth Rogen as Bob, it's not particularly unique as a film. Most of it is just fine, but nothing really to write home about.
I like to move it.
Madagascar is a comedy where some of the jokes really hit, and others don't hit so well. Similar to Shark Tale, it references quite frequently, and often just for the sake of referencing, though I did kind of like the American Beauty reference. Outside of the random culture references, however, Madagascar is mostly pretty funny. There's a lot of jokes I laughed at, and I liked most of the casting choices. While it's not good, it's not awful, and I think I enjoyed it overall.
I'm in a glass case of emotion!
Megamind never really appealed to me that much, as a teen or an adult. It is visually appealing, and has a fair amount of good comedy, but it also strikes me as unoriginal, bearing too many similarities to Despicable Me and The Incredibles, the latter of which being a far superior superhero parody in my opinion. It also features way too many predictable plot points and outcomes, especially the liar revealed bit. And if it was making fun of the liar revealed cliché, which would fit well with the film trying to be a superhero parody, then it might actually be funny. But no, they play it dead serious, and the outcome is rather predictable. Megamind is a decent kids movie, but honestly not much more.
You are a god.
Even if its story is not particularly strong, The Road to El Dorado is still a lot of fun to watch, providing good comedy and great music and animation. Although Hans Zimmer only does 2 instrumental scores for the film, he did contribute to some of the songs, which are pretty good, and reunited him with Elton John and Tim Rice, who he worked with on The Lion King. Although the score and songs aren't quite as good here as they were in that film, they are still pretty good overall. The animation looks great as well, especially the look of El Dorado. Where the film falls flat is its story, which, to be honest, is not particularly strong, and does ride a couple of cliches, including the lie revealed bit, though it thankfully doesn't drag it out as long as other movies. The Road to El Dorado is a flawed but fun experience for the whole family. Much like the Madagascar trilogy, Penguins of Madagascar definitely prioritises comedy above everything else, and the film is often very funny. I think one of my favourite scenes is when the penguins arrive in the desert and say they know what to do next, and then it cuts to them bouncing off the bounce house. It's genuinely hilarious. The film does also have a lot of fun action, as well as an interesting villain. Though there are some uninteresting characters and bad attempts at emotional depth, it's still a fun movie, and a much better spin-off than Minions.
Dragon!
How to Train Your Dragon 2 is a good continuation of the first movie, but it definitely has flaws. The pacing is slow at times, the humour isn't that funny, and some of the characterization is kind of off. The villain's motivation is simply to take over the world, which is really generic. Volga feels really sidelined. Her introduction doesn't have a whole lot of build-up, and I think showing her backstory at the beginning, instead of when she reunites with Hiccup, would have been more impactful. Even Li Shan's sudden appearance in Kung Fu Panda 3 at least had build-up in Kung Fu Panda 2, especially in that ending scene. But also, Valka is basically superfluous to the story, given that Hiccup still would have found the Alpha Dragon and could have learned about its role. And while her reunion with Stoik and their song is quite emotional, their time together feels really rushed before they once again become separated, and this time permanently because of Stoik's death. With that said, I think the choice to kill off Stoik in this movie was an interesting one, as it presents that conflict between Hiccup and Toothless, and causes the former to drive the latter away in anger. It enhances the friendship between the two in an interesting way that maintains problems, but ultimately is resolved by the end. And I do like Hiccup's arc of realising that not every bad person can be changed. It also maintains the intriguing action, animation, and music that made the first film good. How to Train Your Dragon 2 is good overall, though it definitely doesn't hold a candle to the first movie.
Worst chicken fight ever.
As can be said with The Road to El Dorado, Chicken Run succeeds despite a problematic story, with the lie reveal bit in the third act being a major problem for me. Amidst its flawed story, however, Chicken Run is a good movie overall. Not only was this the first film in which DreamWorks and Aardman worked together, it was also Aardman's first feature film, and the animation looks amazing. Stop motion is honestly one of the few forms of animation that can hold up decades later, and the attention to detail here is spectacular. The main characters are good, but the side characters are great. Nick and Fetcher provide a lot of sharp comedy. A lot of the best lines of dialogue in the film come from Babs, who is just hilarious to watch. And the climax is a lot of fun to watch as well. Chicken Run is well animated and entertaining, though it doesn't quite live up to DreamWorks' other partner projects with Aardman.
Hey, Hedge. Draw!
Madagascar Escape to Africa and Madagascar 3 Europe's Most Wanted are pretty much on par with each other. They're both improvements over the first movie, but I don't know which one I like better. Madagascar Escape to Africa is definitely an improvement over Madagascar. Not only is the comedy funnier, but there's also a lot of emotional depth to it. And while it does feature the argument cliché, it also breathes life into Alex's character arc and seeing the importance of his family and friends. Despite similarities to The Lion King, whether intentional or not, the writing of the film is genuinely interesting, and Zuba and Makunga are intriguing new characters, with Bernie Mac and Alec Baldwin being well cast as well. They also give Nana a bigger role than that of the previous film, and she makes for a hilarious antagonist to Alex. And then there's Madagascar 3. I don't really understand why Alex's parents disappear, but the rest of the film is good overall. It's not as poignant as the second film, but it is far funnier and wackier. The DreamWorks really wore out that Afro circus scene, didn't they? But yeah, Madagascar 3 does have a lot of good laughs, especially with Captain Dubois. Finding out she was voiced by Frances McDormand is pretty amazing. And the film does have a lie revealed bit, but it's actually used well here. Having Alex and his friends return to the zoo and contemplate that their true home is at the circus is well handled. Had the lie reveal bit not happened, they never would have come to this realization, and them just joining the circus wouldn't have had the same impact. Madagascar 2 is more poignant, but Madagascar 3 is funnier. But they both do good jobs with the vice versa. So, I guess it comes down to what you're looking for in a Madagascar movie, whether it be the more poignant one, or the more comedic one. Something that does strike me as odd about the Croods is the character of Belt. His entire character is just shouting, dun, 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 and it gets annoying quickly. I think he might have been added as a comic relief, but that also doesn't add up, given that the main characters are actually a lot funnier. But on that note, The Croods is a fun and creative film, with entertaining characters, particularly in Grog, Eep and Guy, who are voiced very well by Nicolas Cage, Emma Stone and Ryan Reynolds. Reynolds appeared in both of DreamWorks' 2013 movies, and this one was clearly so much better. Some parts of the journey and some of the conflicts can be boring at times, though definitely not as boring as Dinosaur, or The Good Dinosaur for that matter. And the animation is really interesting, and doesn't suffer from the bizarre illusions that were attempted by either of these two movies. The part of the film I do find especially entertaining is when Grog tries to invent things, and none of them work particularly well. This is frequently funny, and it actually makes me want to see a Flintstones prequel about how Bedrock came to be. And what the heck they celebrate in December given that Christ hadn't been born. Though, if it's anything like Viva Rock Vegas. The Croods is visually stunning, and features a fair share of entertainment value and interesting characters. While it's not amazing, it is practically The Incredibles when you compare it to that piece of shit that came out the same year.
Abominable! Can you believe that?
The first 30 minutes of Abominable were great. I liked the way the story was set up, and I found it wholesome how Everest was looking for friends. The rest of the movie, though not quite as good, was still enjoyable to watch, even if the climax had some pretty questionable elements, like the fake-out death of the protagonist, and the twist villain, which, although unpredictable, also didn't add much to the story, if anything at all. Plus, why did she look like a cross between Merida from Brave and the babysitter from The Incredibles? Something that did surprise me, and in a good way, was Burnish's character development. When he was introduced, I thought he was going to be a copy of Charles Muntz from Up, but to my surprise, he ended up having a change of heart, and helping to keep Everest safe. I liked that. Despite its flaws, Abominable is not abominable at all.
Our world doesn't deserve you. Yet.
The first time I saw The Hidden World, I didn't think much of it, but I did always think the last 20 minutes were great, and the friendship between Hiccup and Toothless was wrapped up really well. Upon rewatching the movie, I stand by this, but I also now like the movie a lot more as a whole. The first act is pretty interesting, and I really like Hiccup's conflict about how to keep the dragon safe, and how it progresses through to the third act of him realising that he has to let go of Toothless in order to accomplish this. And their final goodbye is extremely poignant. The film also maintains the superb animation, music and action of the previous films, providing an improvement over that of the second film. That said, there are negatives. As with the second movie, the villain is just boring, and I don't remember anything about him. The movie does also feel a bit slow in the second act, and the humour just ain't funny, as can be said with the other two movies. There's a running joke in which Jonah Hill Viking tries to get with Hiccup's mum, and it's just boring. Could DreamWorks please cast Jonah Hill in a role where he's not a simp? Oh, and make sure it ain't this. But despite this, The Hidden World is a good conclusion to the trilogy, and the amazing third act especially helps to end it on a high note.
What's that?
Kung Fu Panda 3 is a good movie. While it is the weakest of the three Kung Fu Panda movies, it's also the most visually stunning. This film is one of the most gorgeous animated movies I've ever seen, and any scene in the spirit realm is pure eye candy. There are things I don't like about this movie. Not all the humour lands for me, although there are also funny jokes to make up for that. And the villain is actually very forgettable, and I barely remember anything about him. But despite this, it does expand the Kung Fu Panda universe in intriguing ways, including addressing the true effect of the Wuxi finger hold, and how it sends them to the spirit realm rather than somehow killing them, as was implied by Tai Lung in the first movie. As I think the third act, and the way so much is addressed in such an intriguing manner, is great. The voice acting is also still superb, and Bryan Cranston is a great newcomer as Poe's biological father, Li Shan. And even though Kai is a bland villain, J.K. Simmons still gives it his all. Despite its flaws, Kung Fu Panda 3 is still a good movie.
Shut up!
The Croods: A New Age is an improvement on the first Croods movie. It does what a sequel should in expanding the universe, and honestly, providing even more creative and funny world building than that of the original. I also think it presents more interesting conflicts and arcs for the characters, particularly in how Guy tries to follow in the footsteps of his parents' friends, while Eep tries to show their daughter Dawn the fun she's had as a cave girl. It's a movie where almost every minute I wanted to see where it would go, even if not every minute was amazing. The film uses the lie revealed bit and the characters disband, and the outcome, as usual, is predictable, and the film doesn't exactly subvert the cliché. And while I do like the relationship between Guy and Eep, it's also a little generic that they realised they were searching for their tomorrow, but it was each other all along. Despite this, The Croods: A New Age is a good movie, and unlike Boss Baby 2, it's an improvement on the original, as well as being a good movie.
I can burp my ABCs!
A-B-Z.
Hammy!
Over the Hedge suffers from a similar problem to Chicken Run, the lie revealed bit in the third act, which, as with that film, kind of irks me. With that said, I still think it's a very funny film, with great animation and a lot of great humour, particularly in Steve Carell's vocal performance as Hammy. I mean, who doesn't remember this guy? And the rest of the casting and vocal performances are pretty spot on as well, and they fit the characters. With this said, I know a couple of people have said that they never go over the hedge, but rather through it. But Vincent goes over the hedge at the end. Damn, Bruce Willis ended up in feuds with a lot of Vincents, didn't he? First Vincent Vega, then his patient in The Sixth Sense, and here Vincent the Bear. Weird.
Are there other bugs in your life?
Antz was the first animated DreamWorks movie. I remember liking it as a kid, and I still like it as an adult, though I definitely think it's steered more towards adults than kids. While it's not as good a first movie as Toy Story, I do prefer it to A Bug's Life. I think the story and world building are more intriguing, primarily in how, unlike A Bug's Life, the insects are of different sizes, which gives the atmosphere a more threatening feel. And although Antz is less colourful than A Bug's Life, the colour palette nonetheless fits the darker tone and atmosphere of the movie. The casting choices are mostly pretty spot on, and although the characters were designed to resemble their voice actors, it's not nearly as uncanny as the character designs in Shark Tale, and the characters managed to look distinct from one another. The only casting choice I don't like is Christopher Walken, who, as much as I love him as an actor, doesn't fit the role of Cutter. Overall, Antz is intriguing, funny, and a good first movie for DreamWorks Animation.
That's right, Mr. Peabody.
Quiet, you.
This is actually the very first piece of Peabody-related media I ever watched, obviously not counting brief cameos. And this actually does make me intrigued. Even if you're not familiar with the source material, Mr. Peabody and Sherman is still a lot of fun to watch. I really like the relationship between Peabody and Sherman. It's a very wholesome connection, and provides an interesting anti-discrimination message. I also like Penny's character development in the movie, and while I was initially worried they would have her and Sherman fall in love, I was relieved that they just kept them friends by the end. The film is also visually appealing. The designs of every historical landscape look amazing, and certain effects add to the fun meter of the movie. I also think the actors are well cast, and I didn't realise that it was Alison Janney who voiced the bigoted child services agent Mrs. Grunion. Though are we really going to gloss over the fact that Patrick Warburton Agamemnon kidnapped her and she actually fell in love with him? If Beauty and the Beast showed no build-up or development in the relationship between Belle and Beast, and she just fell in love with him with no rhyme or reason, it would probably be something like this.
You want me to be the bad guy? Fine.
The Bad Guys is a movie that takes a variety of cliches, and, mostly, makes interesting plot subversions out of them. Granted, there are problems, like the argument bit, which as always has a very predictable outcome. I also think Mr. Snake having a change of heart, then abruptly joining the villain, was so weirdly executed. I guess it is kind of important to the story, but if they wanted it to be more subversive, they should have shown him abandon the others, and then gone back to them. And then reveal the plan he hatched for the villain, without showing him finally give Mr. Shark the lolly. I also don't find Mr. Piranha funny, and the toilet humour never made me laugh. But at least he does serve the story, just not so well in the field of comedy. With this said, there's a lot to like. I like its distinct animation style, which reminds me of various different directors' visions, including Quentin Tarantino and Edgar Wright. The film has similarities to Disney's Zootopia, and while the anti-discrimination message isn't executed quite as well as that film, the twist villain is so much better. Professor Marmalade is a good twist villain, and his motivations line up well. I especially think his plan to frame the bad guys while he takes on the image of the cute innocent guinea pig is rather smart. Despite the humour from Mr. Piranha not being funny, most of the jokes in the movie are actually funny, especially the running joke with the grappling hook. I think the police chief voiced by Alex Borstein is hilarious, and seeing her gloat about her reputation for taking in Mr. Wolf, and then giving a speech when he finally turns himself in, genius.
Hear the roar.
Yep, Shrek Forever After is underrated. I think the concept of Shrek in a It's a Wonderful Life situation is an interesting one, and his arc of learning to embrace who he is and what he has comes full circle in this movie. Despite an abysmal predecessor that could very much be skipped over, Shrek Forever After is a fitting conclusion to the Shrek franchise. It's especially great that this film acknowledges how Shrek was the one who changed the minds of humans who discriminated against fairy tale creatures, and thus, had Shrek not existed, they would still be abused and discriminated against. And Rumpelstiltskin is such a great villain. He manages to be a combination of evil, smart, and hilarious at the same time, and continually succeeds with most of his schemes. Well, until the end. It also features a lot of the emotional depth that made the first two films great. Seeing Shrek cry for the first time, and Doggy seeing a more emotional side to him, Fiona starting to see a more sympathetic and selfless side to Shrek, and most especially, this last exchange.
You know, I always thought that I rescued you from the Dragon's Keep.
You did?
No, it was you that rescued me.
There are problems with the film, though. A few of the jokes don't land so well, and there are plot holes regarding travel. For example, how did the witches take Shrek from his swamp to far, far away in an afternoon when it was established in Shrek 2 that it would take days to get there? But in spite of these, Shrek Forever After is a good conclusion to the Shrek franchise, and although a Shrek 5 is coming, I'm honestly not sure how they'll make it work. I guess we'll have to see.
Oh, all right. You can be a guardian again.
Rise of the Guardians is one of DreamWorks' most underrated movies. I really like the premise about how all these mythical creatures are associated with each other, and the casting choices are pretty spot on. And Jack Frost's arc for the film is actually rather emotionally gripping, and it really wraps up nicely. The film is also frequently fun to watch. Occasionally it will ease the fun to focus on more serious moments, but these are also well done, and balance out well with the more light-hearted elements. While I'm not particularly big on the villain's design, the rest of the animation looks great, and adds to the overall entertainment value. Rise of the Guardians is fun, emotional, and creative.
Hey, you want to see something cool?
Puss in Boots: The Last Wish is a huge improvement on its predecessor. The premise of the movie is quite creative and funny, and the script and atmosphere of the movie lean more into the fractured fairy tale trope than the previous film did, and even features some well-incorporated cameos from other Shrek characters. This film feels more like a spin-off of Shrek than the first one did, even expanding on the cute eyes joke from Shrek 2. I also think this duology could be considered the sandwich of the Shrek franchise, at least chronologically. Puss in Boots takes place during, or possibly even before, the events of Shrek, and before the Shrek sequels, while Puss in Boots: The Last Wish takes place after Shrek Forever After. As such, Puss's character arc about learning not to take his life for granted feels complete by the end. I also like Goldilocks' arc in the film. Her motivations for wanting the wishing star make sense, and I like how the three bears are willing to help her, even when learning about why she wants it. And her realisation at the end is poignant to a certain extent, even if somewhat predictable. I also like the character of Wolf, and how he chases after Puss, seeking to kill him simply because Puss has been taking his life for granted. That's just funny to me, and the fight between him and Puss in the climax is fun to watch, and reminds me, in a good way, of the fight scenes in the Kung Fu Panda films. While the film is overall very good, I'm not sold on the character of Jack Horner. His motivation is simply that he wants the wishing star to be the most powerful creature in existence. And he's just kinda boring, and he inhabits that dumb cliche of making you think he's dead, only to then emerge and fight again. And Burrito, while he has his moments, can be annoying at times, but I'll take him over Olaf in Frozen 2 any day. Overall, Puss in Boots: The Last Wish is a surprisingly good sequel to a bang-average movie, and feels much more like a spin-off of the Shrek movies. How to Train Your Dragon is probably the DreamWorks equivalent of Coco. It has a lot of great moments, but the overuse of story cliches is what holds it back from achieving greatness as a whole. most notably the protagonist being an outcast because he's different, and the main characters not liking each other, but then falling in love on their adventure. With that said, it's still a very good movie. As well as the animation, a particular aspect that needs attention drawn to it is the music. After collaborating with Hans Zimmer to bring us an amazing Kung Fu Panda score, John Powell returned to score How to Train Your Dragon on his own, and that Oscar nomination was warranted. The relationship between Hiccup and Toothless is very compelling, and the scene where Hiccup learns how to fly him feels like an absolute triumph, honestly on par with Miles learning to use his powers in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, or Superman learning to fly in Man of Steel. And although it does take on the not judging based on appearances message, it does nonetheless do it in an intriguing way, with a message that encourages peace between humans and animals. Overall, How to Train Your Dragon is exciting, emotional, and beautifully animated.
Oh, shit! Alright!
Flushed Away is one of the funniest and most underrated animated films I've ever seen, and I'm tired of pretending it's not. Not everything about this film is great, the designs of the humans aren't great, and the film does have the whole protagonists don't like each other trope, as well as using a predictable misunderstanding cliché, though not handling it as badly as Shrek did, as much as I love Shrek. And yes, I know this is a movie about sewers, but some of the toilet humour doesn't do it for me.
Careful, mate! Those aren't chocolate buttons!
Yeah. But my god, almost everything else is great. The film is frequently hilarious, and like the Shrek movies, the cultural references are funny if you understand them, and even if you don't, they still work in the context of the story. The sewer world and the use of human-created objects to build it is also very creative, as is the villain's plan. The way it executes the message of the importance of family and friends is also well done in my opinion, as is how Roddy realises money won't buy him happiness, and that he'll be much happier with Rita than by himself in a huge house. It's built up and handled in a subtle manner. The voice actors are so perfectly cast, and perform their parts well, but the best performance would be Ian McKellen as the Toad. His line delivery makes his dialogue at least 10 times funnier than it already is, and Hugh Jackman and Kate Winslet bring a lot to their roles as well. It's a shame they haven't worked together since then, but at least it meant they never made a bad movie together. Right? Right?
What are you gonna do, big guy? Shit on me?
After a year including an awful stain on a great franchise, as well as a mediocre shitpost film, DreamWorks took a giant step forwards with Kung Fu Panda, a visually stunning, emotionally gripping masterpiece. And not only did they finally make proper use of Hans Zimmer again, they paired him up with John Powell, and they collaborated to produce another amazing score. I remember Doug Walker describing this film as the ultimate never judge a book by its cover movie, and I strongly agree. You wouldn't believe that a movie where Jack Black voices a panda learning Kung Fu could be great, yet it succeeds. And to add to that, Jack Black is probably the most perfectly cast actor in the film. But there's also the great casting and talents of Dustin Hoffman, Angelina Jolie, Ian McShane, and James Hong to add icing to that freshly baked cake. It also has great action scenes, whether they intend to be more serious or more comedic. But above all, Kung Fu Panda has a great message. Although it does follow the whole don't judge people based on appearances shtick, it does so in an intriguing way, primarily with the significance of the scroll. The scroll appears to be blank, but when Po has the conversation with his father about his secret ingredient soup, he realises that by believing he's special, and by seeing his reflection on the scroll, he himself is the secret ingredient stopping Tai Lung. As for the film itself, there was no secret ingredient to making it great. It was the work of an insanely talented cast and crew. Shrek was the film that changed DreamWorks animation forever, and influenced comedy films of the noughties. Sometimes for better, sometimes, for worse. But this isn't something Shrek should be blamed for. Its setup and style of humour were done well for this film, and the film is also great as a whole. The way it subverts Disney and fairy tale trends and traditions is really well done. From the opening scene, you know exactly what kind of film it's going to be, and it continues to be just that from there, with almost every pop song being used to great effect in the scenes they're used in. Through Shrek and Fiona's arcs, it provides brilliant messages about seeing the good in yourself, and not judging people based on looks. Well, when you ignore the excessive jokes about Lord Farquaad being short, which get old very quickly as well. The casting choices are perfect, with Mike Myers, Eddie Murphy, and Cameron Diaz breathing both humour and emotion into their line deliveries whenever appropriate, and John Lithgow bringing a lot of humour to his role as Farquaad. One of the few things that brings the film down is the misunderstanding part. It's overlong and predictable, and while it does bring one interesting use of visuals in how Fiona sees the knight armour and remembers how Shrek saved her in a knight helmet, it's otherwise really boring. Maybe if it was making fun of the misunderstanding cliché, it would be funny, but it's clearly not. Does this derail the entire film? Of course not. Overall, Shrek is creative, funny, emotionally gripping, and a ton of fun to watch, and deserves its place in the National Film Registry.
Underpants, no!
The fact that the Academy somehow deemed Boss Baby to be the superior DreamWorks film of 2017 is the biggest mystery of all. Captain Underpants, the first epic movie, is unironically amazing. I never read the books as a kid, but if this is a faithful adaptation, then I'm definitely intrigued. One of the things that makes me love this film so much is that it aims almost entirely for comedy, and doesn't try to shoehorn in forced emotional depth. The film does try small bursts of emotional depth, but it works in the context of the story, and flows naturally within the film's tone. The film does have George and Harold separated before reconciling for the third act, but it subverts the trope by having them become separated forcefully, and not because they chose to. And that friendship is not only believable, but it also sets the stepping stones for great comedy. And I also really like the way the film executes its message about how, even if you're separated, you can still be best friends. And this movie is hilarious. I laughed out loud frequently during this movie. The humour is creative and fast-paced, as it should be. And while I'm not usually one for gross humour, the film uses it well in the context of its story, and generates great humour. Captain Underpants and Professor Poopy Pants are both hilarious characters, and I like how they're given character besides simply being a superhero or supervillain, including showing the former's secret identity Mr. Krupp outside of school, and giving him character besides simply being a mean school principal. Captain Underpants, the first epic movie, is creative, hilarious, visually appealing, and when it wants to be, very emotionally gripping, and I don't get why people don't talk about it much.
No crack, Gromit. We've forgotten the crack.
Hands down one of the funniest parody films I've ever seen, and just like the first two Shrek films, you don't have to know the references in order to enjoy the film. Not only is the animation superb, and like the majority of stop-motion films has aged like fine wine, but the comedy is top-notch, and comes through the pacing and line delivery. As well as Peter Sallis bringing such comedic presence to Wallace, Ray Fiennes and Helena Bonham Carter are also superb as Victor and Lady Tottington. And I also have to mention just how funny a lot of the side characters are, including the Vicar, the Constable, and Mrs. Mulch. It maintains the charm, creativity, and wit that made the Wallace and Gromit short so good, and, well, it's a Wallace and Gromit feature film. How can you not love it?
I want
To please. Oh, grand.
Kung Fu Panda 2 is one of those rare sequels that improves on the original. It ups the action, it ups the comedy, and most especially, it ups the drama. The way it ups the drama involves giving us Poe's backstory and giving more insight into the relationship between Poe and his adoptive father, Mr. Ping. And this is hugely poignant. The revelation at the end of the second act, in which Poe finds out what happened to his mother, is just heartbreaking. But this entire scene where the soothsayer tells him that his past won't define the rest of his journey is just brilliant. And providing a balance between drama and comedy, they round it off with this hilarious line.
I am Poe, and I'm gonna need a hat.
They also give us a brilliant new villain, voiced by the amazing Gary Oldman. And both him and the writers deliver the goods, providing Lord Shen with a threatening appearance, a devious voice, a truly diabolical scheme, and even some great comedy to balance it all out. The only major problem I have with the film is how most of the characters the film introduces don't really get a lot of screen time. While the Furious Five all warrant major roles and get their own moments to shine, I do wish the new characters had also had some more screen time, and given us more time to get to know them. But in spite of that, Kung Fu Panda 2 still delivers great action, great comedy, great drama, great animation, great music, and is an all-around great experience.
hit it.
Shrek 2 is just so continually creative, funny, entertaining, and emotionally gripping, and another rare sequel that improves on the original. Granted, not all the jokes land, and there's some pretty transphobic ones.
And what does he find? Some gender-confused wolf. It's a thong!
But almost everything else about this film works wonders. I love the way it continues Shrek's arc of him trying to love himself, in spite of the majority still seeing him as a monster. And I think his romance with Fiona is really legitimate, and it's great to see just how devoted to each other they really are. And my god, is this film funny. For every one joke that doesn't land, there are 5 that do. From the trumpet, to Donkey realising the fairy godmother is Prince Charming's mother, to Shrek and Donkey being arrested, it's just hilarious. And then we get to this scene, which is one of the greatest scenes in any film I've ever seen, maybe the best in animation. It manages to simultaneously balance hilarity, emotion, and excitement, with the most perfect song choice in any of the Shrek films. While I don't know if this cover is better than Bonnie Tyler's version, I think the inclusion of Saunders' cover in Shrek 2 is better than Tyler's in Footloose, because in the latter, it's really just a song playing in the background, though a great one nonetheless. Shrek 2 is hilarious and gripping, and one of the best sequels ever made.
I think this just might be my masterpiece.
The Prince of Egypt is one of the best animated films and musical films I've ever seen. Despite artistic license and an attempt at appealing towards the family demographic and not just adults, The Prince of Egypt manages to be a mature, visually stunning masterpiece that tells the story of Moses without dumbing down or sugarcoating anything. The music and songs are fantastic, and they have a serious nature to them, as the rest of the film does. The film goes in the direction of a serious tone and handles it perfectly. The themes are rich and fleshed out, and the way in which Moses and Ramses become separated due to their conflicting desires is devastating, but also rich and meaningful in the motivations of the characters. Despite the voice cast consisting mostly of celebrities, as can be said with many DreamWorks animated movies, they all do a good job here, and really fit the roles they voice, particularly Val Kilmer and Ralph Fiennes. This could easily be mistaken for a Disney movie, but even if it was, it'd still be pretty high on that list. Honestly on par with the best movie of the Disney Renaissance, Beauty and the Beast. And although The Prince of Egypt takes a different approach to the majority of DreamWorks films that succeeded it, it's still a welcome, mature, and beautifully animated approach that gives it the title the best animated DreamWorks movie ever made.